All right, I think I'm going to go for it. So welcome. We couldn't be more excited to have everyone joining us in this opening plenary for our official second annual Children's Funding Institute. But as Margaret Brodkin, our co-host at Funding the Next Generation, and I will say, we've actually done this a couple more times. And this is just our second official institute. Unfortunately, of course, it's virtual, and we know we won't be able to get as rich of sort of that boot camp feel that we had last year in Denver, but we're going to do our best. And Olivia Allen and Shane Linden on the CFP team have done a really great job of making sure that we've got some rich opportunities for folks to engage. So to the broader audience of folks that are joining us for this opening plenary, let's go ahead and get started. And I want to, one, acknowledge Margaret and Funding the Next Generation for co-hosting this. I also want to acknowledge the Heising Simons Foundation and the California Endowment for really having a lot of faith in the ideas that Margaret and I have been presenting over the years. And so Margaret, you want to welcome folks too?
Yeah, I'm just thrilled to be here and welcome you with Elizabeth on behalf of Funding the Next Generation, which works primarily in California, as we launch the next phase of our movement to ensure that communities put their money where their priorities are, and that our priorities are for the next generation, our children and our youth. It's going to be a great year.
Great. So I'm going to hold on introducing the other three folks that you see here, because I'm going to share a few things to just lay some groundwork before we get into stuff. And so sit tight, Kim, Isaac, and Jessica. We'll get to you in one sec. So just to level set, the week that comes after this opening plenary is really going to be dedicated to working with the 35 or so communities that have put together teams to think about how now is the right moment to begin laying the groundwork for these local public dedicated funds for children and youth. So at CFP and at Funding the Next Generation, we really have a strong belief that there's some important elements of local public dedicated funding. The local piece is in response to the need for more flexible local dollars to meet your own community's needs. It's been a missing piece of our funding landscape, and we believe there's a movement afoot to really build this from the ground up. Public, because we know that it is going to take infusion of more public dollars to really turn the curve on outcomes for children and youth, and that, any ideas that we have that we could privately fund our way to success for kids is just wrong. We must have significant investment from the public sector. And then dedicated, because it's hard year after year to go and fight for a line item in a budget and protect that line item. We believe that because kids can't vote, and because, they are often sort of an afterthought when it comes to funding processes in local budgets, that we've got to dedicate the money. And so these are important elements of what we're going to talk about. We also think that we're on the verge of something. We did not see a red wave. We did not see a blue wave in this country in November. We did see a little mini children's wave. And I think that, as the nation shifts, as our demographics change, as, the makeup of our cities and suburbs and rural areas changes, we are on the vanguard of building a movement for children. And we're going to have those really successful models that can show what it could look like at the state level, what it could look like at the national level. So we're really convinced that this is an idea, not the only idea, but an idea that needs some attention. So just to give you a very quick sense, that there is sort of a movement building. Wanted to just give you a little flash through the last 60, 70 years. So the 1940s, the very first local dedicated fund was created because a juvenile court judge said, I am tired of kids coming through at this late stage in the game into my courtroom, and we're not doing anything about it. And so he got passed this local fund in Pinellas County. In the 1980s, wait a minute, I said 1940s, and then we had to wait until the 1980s to get any others passed. But there started to be a rolling stone in Florida because they had state enabling legislation. So some more Florida counties came on board. The 1990s, we saw more Florida places. And of course, Margaret in San Francisco made the San Francisco Children and Youth Fund happen. And you'll hear more about that throughout the week, I'm sure. And then in the 2000s, something happened in the middle of the country. I'm from Missouri, and there were 10 counties that, because again, they had state enabling legislation, were able to go and create these local dedicated funds for children's mental health services. By the 2010s, we were starting to actually see something that felt like a movement, right? This was starting to trickle out into other states and across the country, not just on the coasts, not just in Florida and Missouri. So the 2020s, which, you know, we've only got half a pandemic year in here so far in the 2020s, we again watched a number of places have success on the ballot. One thing I would just say about, you know, what happened this year, we had a bunch of folks that came to our institute last year, and Jessica and Kim will tell you about that, but we had people that probably 11, 12 communities that said, we want to do this, and we're going to do it on that November 2020 ballot because we know it's going to be a presidential year. There's going to be a lot of voter turnout. Of course there was, but then COVID hit, and then we thought, oh gosh, you know, are we going to be able to do this in the midst of this time that we're in? And we got on the phone with those places, and to a T, they all said, we're still going to go for it. We think that this is something that we can still do. And so they're going to tell, a couple of them are going to tell you their stories. And then I will just say there were additional wins in addition to those that were just on the map. Places like Anchorage were able to get an alcohol tax passed right in the midst of COVID hitting. St. Louis City added on to theirs. The state of Colorado did a universal pre-K vaping tax. There were a number of things that happened, a couple of reauthorizations that were really important. One thing to say about the reauthorizations is that most of these folks that we just pointed out that won in 2020, won within the 60% range of the vote. The reauthorizations win with 70% range of the vote. So that tells me something, right? Like people like these things. Once they have them in their community, they want more of it. So I would just say to anybody who's sitting there thinking that this is potentially a partisan issue, the last thing I'll say, and then we're going to jump to our speakers, is that this is absolutely not a partisan issue. And if you look at sort of in each of these communities, how the Children's Services Fund did compared to how the winning presidential candidate in that county did, the Children's Services Fund always did better than the winning candidate. So people from both sides of the aisle are voting to support these things. So all of that to say, here's who is with us today and this week at the Children's Funding Institute. This is the list of communities that have put teams together to attend. We're excited that some of these places will be on the map next year. And to the folks in San Joaquin County and the folks in New Orleans, Louisiana, we want to say we are so proud that you are here and that you are coming back. They got knocked down in the November and then in New Orleans a December election, but they have come back and they're going to keep at it until they're successful, and we're going to support them. So I will now, we'll talk about this later. I will now turn to this really excellent panel. So we're going to start with Commissioner Vega Peterson, and Jessica, I believe, has been an activist since she was in high school and has spent some significant part of her career in the technology sector and then pivoted to become an Oregon state legislator, and then has spent the last 4, I think, years in the Multnomah County Commission as one of the 5 county commissioners. And she is going to talk to you about her leadership on the Preschool for All initiative that just passed. Kim Krupa is the executive director of Achieve Escambia. It's a collective impact partnership of sorts in Escambia County, Florida. And Kim spent some of her career in New Orleans working for the Second Harvest Food Bank, and has been more recently in Escambia County responsible for the creation of the Escambia Children's Trust. So she's going to talk about that. And then Isaac Bryan is executive director of UCLA's Black Policy Project. And they describe themselves, let's see, as having a primary focus on producing quality, community-driven research that helps spur policy change. And I thought the spur policy change was apt given everything that has happened in the last 5-6 months, something like that. And he's going to tell you about that work. So I'm going to jump right to Commissioner Peterson and Vega Peterson and let you guide me in the slides. So welcome.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. It is so wonderful to be here today. I have to say, I was talking to folks on our Preschool for All team and just talking about this panel, and we were all so excited because this really does seem like coming full circle from where we were over a year ago, attending the first conference and having this kernel of an idea of what we wanted to do and how we would get it on the campaign, to now being able to talk about and celebrate all this great work that's happened because of it. So I just really want to start off by thanking the Children's Funding Project and Institute, and for all of the great work and support that you're doing throughout the country. I think this is just the beginning of a really great groundswell. So this, I'm so happy to talk about our Preschool for All work and the success that we had on the ballot this November. This slide is just really talking about how we truly believe that we've set up and built one of the most robust, amazing preschool programs in the entire country. We think it's going to be a game changer for generations of children to come. And I'm just so excited to talk to you about it today. Go ahead to the next slide, please.
Trying. No, it's not working. There we go.
Okay, great. So, one of the things when we were talking about our work is, of the three panelists today, we've all kind of had different paths to getting on the ballot. And Elizabeth said she was going to start with me because we've really had the longest time that is taken to get onto the ballot. And so I decided to share this slide, which really talks about our paths. And because I want you to understand really what it took for us to get the win in November and how we were able to get there. And for us, I think one of the key things was really having long-term work within our community so that people were understanding the value and the importance of preschool. When voters passed universal preschool for 3- and 4-year-olds in Multnomah County, right, this wasn't a new idea. There had been a lot of work by business groups, by community organizations, grassroots efforts to really make sure that people understood what preschool was about. It started specifically around this project with United Way and Social Venture Partners working with community-based organizations for a Ready for Kindergarten collaborative process that talked about who are the priority populations that we need to address, who are the kids that have the least access to preschool today, and how can we build a program that serves them. So that was way back in 2012. So we're talking about starting 8 years ago for this. As they were doing that work locally in Multnomah County, the state was also putting together an early learning system. So when I was in the legislature from 2013 to 2016, I was part of that work of setting up early learning hubs throughout the state, including the one that was in Multnomah County called Early Learning Multnomah. And Early Learning Multnomah really did some great work with including and centering parent voice in how they were setting up their policy. So the Parent Accountability Council was made up of parents, specifically Black, Brown, and parents of color, who knew that parents were the first teachers of their children, who knew that they had a lot of great experience to share in what preschool should look like. And so they created this vision for preschool in Multnomah County that was really a foundational document that we used in early 2018 when I was putting together the Preschool for All task force. We started our process knowing who the children were that we wanted to serve because of the priority populations being established, and we knew how we wanted to center race and making sure we were creating an equitable system because of the work that Early Learning Multnomah had done. So that was, so that gave us a great, strong foundation to start from. So when I brought together the Preschool for All task force, which was really made up of folks like, who you would expect. There were businesses, there were early learning experts, there were school districts, philanthropy, elected officials. We also had community-based organizations, culturally specific organizations, and we had parent and provider voice at the table, including labor, because we wanted to make sure that we were getting, again, the full spectrum of voices, really people who were going to help create something that was going to be right for Multnomah County. It would have been really easy, I think, for us to get a consultant to come in and say, this is what your preschool program needs to look like to be great. That's not how I was interested in creating this policy. I didn't think that was going to be serving the work that had already been done with community in terms of what this could be for Multnomah County. And I knew that if we were going to be putting something like this on the ballot, we needed to be building a base of support and some champions in the work all along the way. So that Preschool for All task force met for a year and put out a report in summer of 2019 that was really our jumping off point into the campaign. At the same time that this was happening, though, there was a second separate effort that was working to get universal preschool on the ballot in November of 2020. And that was called Universal Preschool Now. And so, when I was first starting the task force, I had heard about this group, but really, wasn't sure if, if they were going to make it or what their work was. So we were continuing along with our work. Once we published the report and we were working on getting at the ballot, we started having conversations with Universal Preschool Now about their efforts to get a better understanding of what they were doing, what their policy was, with an eye towards unifying. Both of us realized it wasn't going to serve anyone, and it was especially not going to serve our children and our families and our workers if we were going to have two competing preschool measures on the ballot. So we had a series of meetings about getting to unification. During that time, though, 2020 happened, and all of us, were really scrambling to figure out what this was going to look like, how COVID was going to impact our work. But one thing that I really want to give a shout out to Universal Preschool Now is that even during the pandemic, they were able to collect over 30,000 signatures over the summer to qualify their measure for the ballot. So Preschool for All was something that was referred through my board of Multnomah County Commissioners. We didn't need to go out and get a bunch of signatures, but they did, and they were able to do it. And part of the reason they had it is even during the pandemic, we had a lot of protests happening in Portland. You might have heard about that. And so they were able to really go out and get signatures from folks and really show, again, the really strong support that preschool had and the understanding in the community about how important this investment was. So they collected those signatures. We were able to unify in August. We were able to get one single measure on the ballot. And then we were able to work from that point on, from August to November. Everybody was working wholeheartedly to get Preschool for All passed and to make sure voters understood how important it was. And we were able to do that. We passed with over 64% of voters in Multnomah County in November. Yay! So that means that we have a great start for kids. So I just wanted to share really this last slide that really talks about some of the keys to our success. And I actually sent out a text last night to our Preschool for All team saying, what are some of the things that you think are the keys to our success? And a lot of them mirror what I had already put down on the slide, but creating policy creation through authentic power sharing, making sure that we were building true grassroots effort, that we were including voices at the table, that we weren't just tokenizing any one group or organization or individual, that we really wanted to make sure that the people at the table had impact on our policy. And that made our policy better. It made our policy strong in the ways that it was actually going to serve working families, so that if we were talking about a school day program, but people weren't going to be able to use it because they actually needed a workday program, then our policy needed to reflect that and have supports for before and after care in our program, which we put into it. We needed to make sure that it was going to be something that that classroom teachers and assistants had a living wage salary from, right? Those were some of the policy impacts that had. Also know your voters. So we were able to, this universal preschool program is funded through a marginal tiered income tax rate on higher income earners in Multnomah County. That was something that we knew in Portland was going to be a winner, that people were going to be able to support that. It's a very progressive electorate for all of Multnomah County. We polled on that. We made sure that we had a winner there. It was also in line with what Universal Preschool Now was looking at. So we also did it with an eye of eventually unifying with them. We don't have a sales tax in Oregon, which I know is how a lot of other jurisdictions have funded some of these things. We also have limits on our property tax. So we realized with what the mechanisms were available to us, we found out what the voters were going to be able to support. Never lose sight of our North Star. That's really, we started this work with the idea of what if every child had access to a preschool that was right for them and every family could afford it. And that was what we did throughout this whole process. When things got complicated, when things got hard, because it did get hard at times, that was what we were going to focus on. And then I would say the long-term work that we did building coalition, this is something that, again, started with years of efforts in the communities from both of the campaigns. It was enabled us to go from August to November with all cylinders flaring and be able to get this across the finish line in a really strong way. And I think it sets us up for future success in the next policy work that we start, because we have this really strong coalition. We have people who have worked together in this effort, who can rely on each other, who knows what each other's values is, and have trust in that organization that sets us up for success for next time. So those are my big things. I hope that's about 10 minutes. And the last slide I just wanted to show you, this is just part of our coalition.
Oops, sorry.
Oh, no, there you go. Yeah, just part of our coalition. We couldn't even fit everybody on the slide. We had over 155 organizations and individuals that were part of the work to pass Preschool for All, and really proud of the way that people came together to get this win for children in Multnomah County.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's really inspirational for the rest of the country. And you guys have gotten super popular on the scene here. I mean, you've got New York Times articles being written about you and all of that. If you wouldn't mind going into the Q&A, there's a couple of technical questions that folks have, but I want to keep moving us along, and you might be able to just answer them in that way. I'm going to turn to Kim now. So Kim, how the heck?
I think there's one slide before that, but I'll go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I don't know if I have it.
Which is the slide before it is our stat, which is that Escambia County voted yes for kids to the tune of 61%. And it's a picture of me jumping up in the air. And then this is the slide. How the heck did we do that? And I have a lot of slides I'm going to present in a rapid fire. So Elizabeth, bear with me.
I'm ready.
Saying next, but the coalition behind this is still figuring out what the heck. And so this is our best guess right now at the perfect storm that came together on November 3rd and gave us those tremendous results of 61% in Escambia County, Florida. Next. To orient us, this is Escambia County. We are sharing 2 borders with Alabama. We are a deep South county. We are the Redneck Riviera. We are not Rosemary Beach, sorry, Commissioner, but we're pretty close. We're just far enough away to not have any of the good stuff and all of the bad stuff. You can see the disparities here. We really let the data drive our movement, and the data as we proceeded with the campaign was literally getting worse before our very eyes. So we were seeing our whole system crumble as we were turning into advocates and campaigners for kids. At the heart of this is equity and racial justice. And we never lost sight of that. And I think that was a key ingredient to our success. But we didn't start from this. We started a few years earlier. So rewinding, next slide, to 2015. This is our version of Commissioner Jessica's slide, which she ended with. This is how we started. We started with all of these different sectors coming together. Lots of logos here, lots of different groups with competing interests. What they did share in common was that they recognized our community had a serious problem. They didn't understand that they were part of that problem, and that they also held within their organizations and capacities the solution. And so what we started off with was one organization, next slide, in this partnership, being the canary in the coal mine. They were the lone soldier for years until they weren't. And this is our Early Learning Coalition of Escambia County. This is really the organization that started us on this ballot referendum way before anybody was ready. And they beat the bush year after year after year, and nobody listened. Last year, next slide, the primary bush beater, Mr. Bruce Watson in the middle here, called me up and took me to Denver with our teachers union president, Donna Harper, who has since retired. And the three of us went to Denver. This is now an archival picture. I wish we were all together to celebrate this. We had no idea what we were doing. We knew that we had a problem. We knew that this solution existed in other Florida counties called a Children's Services Council. We had no idea what to do with that information. What the Institute taught us is the A to Z path forward. Also, what we learned was that 2020 was going to be a year for kids. And I think Todd and all the pollsters who talked to us last year, that really sunk in. I have a whole notebook full of that insight. And we just really took that information back to our community and gave it to our organizing group and said, we need information about whether 2020 is the year for kids in Escambia County. And so what we did, next slide, is temperature checked whether or not people in our extremely conservative Redneck Riviera community of the Deep South, Florida Panhandle, would vote yes for kids. We got this crazy pie chart from a young chamber group called the Pensacola Young Professionals. This was a quality of life survey done by Mason Dixon. And this was kind of unbelievable. Like, there's no way, 74%. So it was enough, though, to get people excited. Next slide. And who got excited were these angels here on the screen. This is Kim and Julian McQueen. They are with a hotel chain called Innisfree Hotels. They are based in Escambia County, and they wrote the first check. Next slide. So that was all in November 2019. This group is a leadership council for my organization, Achieve Escambia. They voted to dedicate all of our resources for an entire year to the Children's Services Council, Escambia Children's Trust ballot referendum, but we still only had that one check. Next slide. The result of that vote was that we got a second check, and you can see a little logo there that says FS. So here we are, December, January, we're voting yes, we're all in for this ballot referendum with 2 checks. And so, next slide.
And can I just say, folks might hear something in the background. Can you say what's was happening then?
Yeah, and I was going to get to that, but she made her debut.
Okay.
I also did this while having a baby. So I needed help. And the best thing that we did is, on the next slide, we found this guy. And Ron is our campaign manager, and you need to hear his talk Thursday at 1 o'clock, polling in the current state of public opinion. Make sure you participate in that, because it was his whip and drive strategy that really got us moving in a way that none of us good-hearted people with lots of busy things to do would have been able to do otherwise. So literally, we brought Ron on in February. Within a month, next slide, this is what our coalition looked like in terms of activating the base 1 month later. People start to emerge from the woodwork and say, okay, this is what this means for my organization. Next slide. And then this hit. And then, next slide, this hit. We put a bootstrap organization together despite all of these challenges, from COVID to Hurricane Sally on September 16th, which was a Category 2, hit right there on the Florida-Bama border, and really derailed our campaign for a good 2 weeks. But, you know, because we were activating an existing partnership and just basically telling people who wanted something to do what to do, we were able to pull this together. Next slide. These are just a few clips from our social media. Escambia Children's Trust is on Facebook. We're still keeping that account up to date in our transition year. But it was the perfect storm of events to get people excited about something positive, something that would result in meaningful change at a time our community could not have needed it more. Next slide. And so in the end, I think that this is our secret to success in such a rapid fire timeline, is that it's all about collaboration. You can see what exactly that boils down to in terms of getting the word out, activating the base through letters of support and endorsements and donations, both cash and in kind. Really invaluable lesson there is that all of these people who were behind the shared agenda just needed something to do with that energy. And so this is kind of, this next slide is my closing slide, and this is sort of the theme of our campaign. And so laying the groundwork could not be more important, and it's never too late to do that. And knowing that you're building the groundwork for a purpose is something that I think should bring you comfort, that you're building these coalitions, you're building these working groups and these tables for a specific purpose. And so this is not all for naught, but that when the time comes, you need to know when the time comes. And that is it that's my 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And if you need to go grab baby and come back, we totally get it. Isaac, I'm going to turn to you and have you come off mute. I think that, oh, here's Kim's info in case folks want to reach out to her with more detail, but I'm going to stop my share and Olivia's going to pull up your deck. But welcome, Isaac. Tell us, you had the shortest runway to work with here. So tell us about your rapid fire campaign that happened.
Yeah, and I put our website in the chat because I think we spend a lot of time on our digital strategy because of the short window. The Measure J campaign, I got a phone call in August from Eunices Hernandez, who co-chaired this ballot measure with me before it was a ballot measure. And she asked me in August, let's go get $1 billion for our community. Let's go get $1 billion for young people. Let's go get $1 billion for alternatives to incarceration, affordable housing, all the things that we know our communities need. And I didn't ask for much more details before I signed up and said, okay, let's do it. Part of the window here with the pandemic, with COVID-19, is that traditional campaign strategy and traditional ways of getting things on the ballot got thrown aside really quick, and folks had to get really, really creative really fast. And for us, that was a window of opportunity. So for Measure J to get on the ballot, we started by forming the coalition like other folks. And if you click to the next slide, you'll see kind of our steering committee of our coalition. Our steering committee was about 25 members, ranging from the Advancement Project, Liberty Hill Foundation, who was critical, the United Way of Greater Los Angeles, who was critical in getting things off the ground, but a lot of community-based grassroots organizations that work in youth justice spaces and looking at that intersection of opportunity and incarceration. Because here in Los Angeles, we had some of the biggest turnouts following the murder of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Rashard Brooks, and others, in terms of folks taking to the streets and wanting to put something meaningful on the ballot. And we can talk more about that after this presentation. But we had a very diverse coalition of folks who don't traditionally throw down on policy decisions together. And I think that's what made us strong. And Eunices and I, being the chairs, was very intentional by the coalition. In Los Angeles County, we spend $280,000 a year incarcerating just one young person for that year, right? We were spending $70 million a year on a police force, on our LAUSD school district. It's been dropped down to $50 million, but we're spending all kinds of money to criminalize young people, to detach them from the communities, and not money we need for youth development, right? To spur opportunity, for supportive services and the things that we know young people need to thrive. And so that's part of what the building out of Measure J was focused on. What are these things we're spending too much money on, and what should we be spending our dollars on? Not to get directly into the defund conversation, but to instead make sure that our budget matches our values, because we knew we couldn't get this off the ground with a new tax. We had done that with Measure H at the county and HHH at the city, taxes to build affordable housing to address our homeless crisis. And that wasn't going to be the way to move this. So instead, we wanted to call for 10% of unrestricted county revenues to go towards alternatives to incarceration and community investments broadly defined to include youth development, youth support, job placement, job training, and a host of other things. And that was our call. The County of Los Angeles has a budget of $36 billion annually, which is obscene. It's the 10th largest economy in the world, right? With the state of California being the 5th. 10% of unrestricted revenues is about $800 million to $1 billion annually. And so we fought for that carve out. And to be fully transparent, we went for 20% at first. But the way for us to get onto the ballot—
That's how you have to do it, by the way.
Right, ask for 20, maybe you get 10. To get on the ballot, we had to get the Board of Supervisors in LA. There are 5 supervisors who govern the County of Los Angeles. We had to get them to put this on the ballot. We couldn't go collect 500,000 signatures and go through the traditional routes of getting something on the ballot. So we had to get the Board of Supervisors to vote in favor of abdicating their own fiduciary power over the budget to give it back to the people. We needed 3 out of the 5, which we were told was impossible. It wasn't impossible. We got 4 out of 5, right? With the lone dissenting opinion being that it would tie the hands of future county Board of Supervisors, the ballot box budgeting argument we hear all the time. But we knew that this was righteous. We knew it was doable. We knew it was right for the County of Los Angeles. So we got those 4 out of 5 votes. And when we got those 4 out of 5 votes, we started working. We came into this with no dollars raised. So again, I got brought in August. We got put on the ballot towards the end of August. Election day is November 3rd. Found out very, very quickly that because of the language of our motion, which called for, the ballot measure called for 10% of unrestricted revenues to go towards alternatives to incarceration, youth development, community investments, all of these things with this bucket of money, our opposition became the major civic infrastructures that draw a disproportionate share of county resources currently, namely the Sheriff's Department. The Deputy Sheriff's Association put up $3.5 million in opposition to us right out the gate. They ran $2.5 million of TV ads beginning the second week of October through the end of October on all of our local cable networks. So they were ready to spend very big money. And because the Sheriff's Deputies Association is a labor union, they whipped up the House of Labor and they convinced the LA County Labor Federation to oppose this measure, which, you know, we all know in politics, you've got the party endorsement, labor endorsement. Those are kind of the foundation of really building out broader coalition. Well, we lost labor right out the gate and they had $3.5 million more than us. So it was not looking great to start, but we knew we were on the right side of things. Additionally, the LA Times, the day we got onto the ballot, the LA Times wrote a critical piece that this was rushed to the ballot, that there should have be more research. So that's what we were looking at come September. But we hit the ground running and we built out a coalition, much like Jessica and Kimberly spoke of, 150 organizations across the spectrum, folks with a vested interest in what we believed was a moral obligation to put Measure J forward. We chose Measure J. We had our pick of letters. A lot of the coalition wanted to go with Measure X because it sounded radical and fit the moment, fit the year. But J was for justice, right? J was for jobs. Somebody in the coalition said J is for Jubilee, all right? So we went with Measure J. And when it came to starting to raise money, the Liberty Hill Foundation was critical. Patty Quillen was critical. Nicole Shanahan. We have some big donors here in California, and the ability to raise without a cap for a ballot measure allowed us to bring in really big checks if we could convince folks that this was as important as we believed it was. And so ultimately, we were able to match the $3.5 million that they put up. And we did that in 10 weeks, hustling, phone calls, presentations, speaking about what this means to us. And for me and my other co-chair, Anissis, you know, when I was a kid, I was put in the foster care system and put up for adoption at birth. And I was adopted into a family that adopted 9 other children out of the child welfare system, right? My adopted parents were foster parents for 26 years. I had over 100 foster siblings growing up. We moved a lot. I went to 11 different schools. I failed out of middle school. And as a result, somehow I managed to get a graduate degree at UCLA, but my siblings are houseless. They're homeless. I have siblings addicted to harmful substances they use to cope with the trauma of growing up. I have a little brother who's facing a third strike charge for a petty theft, quite frankly, in San Diego right now. And so these issues are very personal for me, and they've guided the way that I have moved this work for the last several years. And it's the same for my co-chair, Nices Hernandez. We also brought kind of a black and brown solidarity to this issue as co-chairs that's really critical in a county like Los Angeles, to be able to bridge those gaps so that those kind of petty politics are not a part of what should be righteous momentum. So we spoke our truths, and that garnered us a lot of earned media that the opposition couldn't outspend. And we spoke our truths digitally. This was a digital campaign. There were no yard signs. There were no posters hung around the city. We took over social media, and we ran an effective Twitter campaign that garnered tens of millions of impressions. We had over 200 million unique impressions on our website. We raised over $150,000 in small donations digitally just on our website. We got an influencer strategy put in place by one of our partners, Build Power, which is chaired by Kendrick Sampson, who brought in Sophia Bush and some of our favorite celebrities to do Instagram Live conversations with us about how important this was. And we put this all together, again, in 10 weeks. We were hustling and making calls, but it seemed like once things got going, the momentum was hard to stop. And the big turning point came for us. Two major things happened kind of midway. The LA County Democratic Party was voting to endorse this measure or to not. And we had already lost labor. So we had a feeling that it was going to be a very hard thing to pull the county party endorsement. But we were on the phone. We were flipping folks from opposition to neutral, from neutral to support. And we ended up getting the county endorsement despite losing the labor fed. And when that happened, that was a big change. And then the LA Times brought us in for a conversation. Their editorial board brought us in. And we were told, like all other parts of this campaign, you are not going to be able to change the LA Times, who was critical on day one, to being supportive now. But we were. And part of the reason we were is because we knew we were standing on the side of something that was bigger than us, that had to do with providing opportunity, care, healing for folks in LA County, for young people, for all people, to start thinking critically about how we invest in systems of harm and incarceration instead of systems of opportunity and support. Again, $280,000 a year per young person to incarcerate them. I often joke that if you give me $280,000 and a young person, I can do a whole lot of good for their life, right? In a whole bunch of different ways that don't involve further criminalization. And that's really what this measure was about. And so when we got the LA Times endorsement and we got the party's endorsement, we started to get a heap of momentum that made it hard to counteract. We still have a campaign debt of about $200,000 that we're working on raising through, because the TV ads scared us. The TV ads were very targeted, right? They said that this was going at essential workers. If you take unrestricted county revenues and you earmark them in any kind of way, it prevents the county from being nimble and flexible, and it's going to pull resources that essential workers need, right? It's going to come from your fire department, which is not true. The fire department is a special district in the county, and you can't touch those funds. But they used a misinformation campaign that didn't speak to who was funding it, which was quite frankly law enforcement agencies. And part of the reason they got behind the opposition is because part of the language in our measure was, if you earmark these funds for opportunity and for justice, they can't be touched by the DA, the probation department, the courts, or the sheriff for any kind of youth development or rebranding work that they're doing, right? It has to go to other structures like mental health, like community-based organizations that are rooted in this work, like the Department of Public Health, Office of Diversion and Reentry, the Youth Development Department that the County of Los Angeles has proposed. There were a lot of ways to spend this that we didn't want them to touch. So we passed on November 3rd. Not quite 60%, although the first round of tallies did have us at 60%. We ultimately ended with, I want to say it was 57. I don't have it up right now. Oh, I do.
Respectable numbers. Yeah.
But what really blew my mind, 57%. But what blew my mind, it was 2.1 million votes, right? Folks in LA County voted in favor of Measure J, and it also fit a lineup of justice initiatives. So it was quick, but it was timely in that we had one of the most important district attorney races in the country happening, where arguably the most progressive district attorney in the country was going against an incumbent who had a history of upcharging, overcharging, and not holding law enforcement accountable. And then we had a county supervisor race simultaneously, and those don't happen very often because a county supervisor is in for 4 years, but you never challenge an incumbent, and they have a 12-year, they can do 12 years before they term out. Well, we had one terming out. And because of that county supervisor race, our board of supervisors now is an all-women board, by the way, and Holly Mitchell, who was the justice candidate in that race, who has a history of fighting for working families and children in particular. Her background running Crystal Stairs here in Los Angeles really cements her as a champion for children and for justice. She was our first endorsement for Measure J. And she was the chair of our state budget in the state legislature, so she could combat the ballot box budgeting narratives. So bringing her in and lining up kind of this list of justice initiatives you should vote for Gascon, vote for Mitchell, vote for Measure J. All three of those won with very similar margins, close to the 60s. And so for us, part of the strategy was not just to anchor this in what we believed was right, but to play the smartest politics we could and to gamble that folks really wanted our budget to reflect our values, that the things that we protest for, the things we fight for should match our budgetary allocations. And I probably went over 10 minutes, so I apologize.
No, but it's a great story. And I know you've got a couple more slides that show the values of the campaign, but I think you just spoke to them, and we're going to send those around to everybody too. So I do want to, one, just congratulate all three of you for what were, monumental feats, I think, at the ballot box and also during this time. So many things were happening, and we're still kind of unpacking that at CFP. What does the time that we were in mean for future measures like this, and what it means to be doing this during a pandemic, doing it while we've got this national reckoning on racial injustice. I would be curious. We had a question that came in about the protests and racial equity and what that meant for your campaigns specifically. If anybody wanted to add anything to what you said about the moment that was happening.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. I did put an answer in the chat to that question. When we started our work on the task force, we asked the question, like, what other jurisdictions have really done something similar and centered racial equity in how they approach the work? And we weren't able to find any one group or organization or jurisdiction that had explicitly done that. So that was something, a core part of our work from day one. So when we were at a point, we were already moving forward with the ballot with Preschool for All, but when we were at a point this summer when the protests were happening, when there was this huge call for dismantling systemic racism and really making different kinds of investments, just like what Isaac was talking about, we were able to say, like, Preschool for All is what you can invest in. We have centered racial equity. We are prioritizing the children who have the least access today, who have been, who aren't having the opportunities that other kids are, and that's especially brown, Black, and all children of color, right? And so we were able to answer the call for that. We're saying, like, this is something positive you can do. This is something you can vote for and people can invest in so that we can build a new kind of system.
Kim, you were in a different kind of a place, so tell us what it meant for you.
For us, it was challenges to our leadership circle and the composition of that circle, and how can communities historically disenfranchised trust these kind of ad hoc people coming around the table talking about issues that for the most part didn't affect us. So for us, it was the challenge of answering, how is this going to be equitable? If approved, how are you going to build equity into the funding formula, the distribution system? How can we build equity into who gets to compete for these taxpayer dollars? It was us answering that call and forcing us to be public and articulate about how this will dismantle the structures that are locked in place, keeping people behind. And all of that within, you know, without making specific promises and saying that there's this whole process set up, but like forcing us to get out there, you know, in Facebook Live, in a lot of our public answers to say how we would ensure equity. And now this is like rubber meets the road now. This is a transition year. We've got to deliver on those promises and bake equity into the system from day one, which is what we're currently doing.
And Isaac, I mean, I think your whole story really speaks to this. If there's anything additional, though, that you want to say about it.
Big thing for us with the moments of this year in particular, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Rayshard Brooks, and others was, you know, Black Lives Matter opened this political window for us and many other policy moves across the country. Some of this work predates that and was headed that way, but for us, it really was the catalyst for opening LA Open. And so Black Lives Matter Los Angeles, Patrisse Cullors, one of the co-founders of Black Lives Matter, became a part of our coalition so that we didn't just play off of a moment that was created that was bigger than us, but it was inclusive in that way.
Great. I realize we skipped over in some cases a very critical question that someone asked in the chat. How did you determine the revenue mechanism and what was it? So maybe Jessica, you've got kind of what to CFP is the most compelling revenue mechanism that you went after. You want to explain a little bit more?
Sure. Yeah. So we, and I think I answered this in the chat too. So we answered, or so we don't have a sales tax in Oregon. Like that's like the very basic things. Like we don't have a sales tax, which is what other jurisdictions have used to fund children's, you know, levies and other things. And we have limits on our property tax. So when we were looking at our tools that were available, we knew that income tax was going to be one that was going to generate enough revenue to actually fund the program that we had planned for. And we went out and we did polling to voters to make sure that, you know, that was something that they would support. We also knew that Universal Preschool Now was looking at a high income earner tax. So that's really what we focused on. Because of COVID, and especially the way that the economic recession of COVID was having such disparate impacts on our communities. Like there were some people who were not feeling any impacts whatsoever. There were other parts of our communities who are feeling devastating impacts because of COVID, right? It also like just made even more sense than it did in the beginning of why a higher income earner tax was a fair measure to fund this program, and again, something that people could understand and support.
And then Kim, yours is sort of baked in as part of the Florida model.
Yeah, property tax.
Yeah. And then Isaac, the set aside is always, and I see Margaret here on the screen too, but the set aside is a California creation. There was a question in there about, so who gets to then make decisions going forward about the tranche of money that you've set aside now?
Yeah, well, Margaret and others have definitely laid the foundation for thinking this way. But for us to set aside, it's going to be between $500 to $800 million, we hope. It's tied to revenues, so as revenues go up and down, it's flexible. There's going to be a 17-person advisory committee with 5 appointments by our Board of Supervisors. Each one gets one. 5 department representatives from county departments that are running programming already in justice and opportunity and the things that Measure J can fund. Those who are ineligible to use Measure J funds are not part of the advisory committee. There's 2 dedicated labor seats to make sure any new civic infrastructures are built in a labor conscious way, and that these dollars, lead to gainful employment for folks as well. And then there's 5 seats for those who've been directly impacted by systems of harm and divestment. So young folks, but also those who have been houseless or living on our streets, and those who have been infected by mass incarceration. And that advisory body, along with a lot of community input and transparency mechanisms, will be making those decisions.
Great. So
for California people, just they need to know a set aside only requires a majority vote, whereas a dedicated tax requires a 2/3 vote.
Right. So when I mentioned at the beginning that our friends in San Joaquin, quote unquote, lost in November, that was with 64 point something% of the vote, just so everybody understands. They had to get 66 and 2/3. So, a loss is a different term in California for for some of those measures. So I just want to thank all three of you so much. We have one more special thing to do here at the end of this before we sign off. So I want folks to stay on and hear this. Last year, we at Children's Funding Project gave our first ever Children's Funding Champion Award. And of course, we gave it to Margaret Brodkin for the ability that we had to stand on her shoulders and do a lot of this work across the country. And that was so very well deserved. This year, we decided that the place that we wanted to give the award to, they attended last year's Institute, and they thought at that point, maybe we can pull this off in 3 or 4 years, maybe. And then something happened in the last year and they decided, no, we're just gonna go for it. And they quickly rallied the troops. And despite this is gonna give it away, despite the fact that the leader of that movement was, standing in front of the county commission on her pregnancy due date and presenting to them why they should place this on the county ballot. And despite the fact that a major hurricane hit in October before the election, and despite the fact that they live in a solidly red state where they knew conservative voters were going to turn out to vote in the presidential election. So you just heard their story, and we want to give this year's Children's Funding Champion Award to the Escambia Children's Trust and Kim Krupa, and of course, shout out to Ron Ellington. But you guys just really inspired us, and I hope that what you did was inspire folks in other parts of the country who maybe think, well, our voters wouldn't go for something like this, but in fact, they will, and they do. And so, Olivia, you have a lovely award that you have handmade, because now it's a tradition that Olivia is forever the maker of the Children's Funding Champion Award. Last year, Margaret got a stained glass that Olivia concocted, and she'll hold it up one more time. I don't think folks got a chance to fully see it. She has embroidered, and that is the Escambia Children's Trust logo of a kid's hand with the county outline in it. I just think it's awesome. So anyways, congratulations, Kim, and it's really well deserved. So.
Well, that was a surprise. Thank you so much. Just really touched. It's beautiful.
Yes, yes. And thanks, Olivia, for your many talents. Including putting on this institute. So I think that is all we have time for, but what we're expecting now for the folks who are part of the full institute, we're going to go straight into just a quick team presentation and then some team time. So in your calendar, you should have a link to join the team time if you're participating in that. And for those of you who just joined to listen to this opening session, we'll be sending out materials very soon. And thanks again, Jessica, Isaac, Kim, we really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thanks so much. This was great. Congratulations, Kim.
Everyone. Thank you.